Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very special edition of Through Conversations podcast, where we explore the truth through conversations with the most brilliant minds. And today, in front of me is a brilliant mind, indeed, Anne-Laure Le Cunff. Anne-Laure, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's an honor, and like I mentioned before we started recording, really your book resonated with me a lot. I'm going through it multiple times, going through the experiments, how to, first of all, your book is tiny experiments, and it's it was really heartfelt because your story is really, you mentioned the hero's journey, right, on your book, Joseph Campbell's, and it does seem like you're at the cusp of like that hero's journey. And just I want to say thank you for sharing your work with us, sharing your journey, which hasn't been easy at all. But and let me ask you, as we introduce our listeners to your book, when was the first time you noticed that maybe the script in Life of Perfection uh, was not the right one? And how did you decide to really take that leap of faith and begin experimenting with other facets of what a life well lived should mean?
I realized that that linear approach to success might not be the one I wanted to follow in life. When I was at Google, I started my career there and I had a pretty successful career by external standards. Good salary, amazing team. I was working on interesting projects, but I felt empty inside. I felt like I was watching a movie that someone had spoiled already, where I knew the ending already, and I had lost interest in playing this game. But on the other hand, I had massive imposter syndrome about being at Google, and so I would say yes to everything. And so it was this really interesting and quite miserable in between, where I was stuck in between being burned out and bored out at the same time. And this is really when I started questioning this linear approach to success that was very much based on climbing the ladder, getting the next promotion, and getting that external validation from my peers. And after I left Google, I decided to start a startup, which I didn't realize at the time was actually another script that I was following, because I was in Silicon Valley and that's what people were doing. And it's only when that startup failed that I finally asked myself the question, what is it you're actually curious about? If nobody was watching, if you remove that traditional definition of success out of the equation and you only focused on your actual interests and what you want to explore, what would that be? For me, that was the brain. I had always been curious about how the brain works. And so I went back to university to study neuroscience. And this is really when I rediscovered that experimental approach based on the scientific method, where instead of focusing on the outcome and being successful in a very binary way, you focus on questions, research questions. You have a hypothesis. And even if it doesn't work out, as long as you learn something new, that's success.
Wow. Why are we so allured to that linear trajectory in life? What is it about our brains that really gets hooked into finding, that certainty in the path of life?
Well, when you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, it makes sense that we're trying to reduce uncertainty as much as possible. If you think back on the environment in which our ancestors were living, the more information you had, the highest your sense of certainty about what was around you, the other players, the resources, the threats, the higher your chances of survival. And so, because of that, our brain is trying to optimize for that sense of certainty. We try to feel like we're in control, like we know what's going to happen. And obviously, this is an illusion, especially in our environment today. We have no idea what's going to happen. And so there is a lot that can be achieved, and we can live much more fulfilling lives if we accept the fact that we're not in control, that there is a lot of uncertainty, inherent uncertainty in navigating today's world, but that can be a playground for experimentation and exploration rather than something that causes fear.
When did you first notice, or because it feels as though many people in today's generation, millennials, Gen Zs, are experiencing this sort of crisis or of emotions in the workplace. Like you mentioned, it's linear, and we know the steps and the scripts we need to follow. We need to climb the ladder to become successful, and then seeing in hindsight a 40-year career, and then after we finish the 40-year career of when we retire, we finally can get back to what you said, the playground. We can finally discover what we truly are. And my deep fear when that happened to me was, when I'm 60, 65, probably my knees will give out, my facade of playing the corporate game will actually eat my true self. So how will I know my true identity? And so how did you cut that umbilical cord, which is not easy in today's world? It's a paradox because, like you say, there's so much uncertainty in life, but at the same time we do have, like, it's visible. If we have the climbing the ladder protocol, it's kind of like easy to live through life, to just breathe. So did you find that courage and just realize, like, I need to step off the matrix?
Well, I mean, that's why my book is called Tiny Experiments, because I actually don't think you need to quit your job or make that big change in order to live a more experimental life. In my case, I quit my job. I actually did it in a very rash way at the time.
Yeah.
And I'm very fortunate that I was able to freelance and to sustain myself while I was figuring it out. But you don't need to do that. You can actually conduct tiny experiments while you maintain a linear approach in other areas of your life, if this is what you need at the moment. You might be in a situation where you need the stable income. You actually, maybe you're the main caregiver for someone. Maybe you have young kids. Maybe you have health issues. Whatever that is at the moment, it might be that you can't just overhaul everything. And so that's why you don't have to just go for, just quit your job and follow your dreams, follow your passion, which I think is very dangerous advice. We always think about the people who have succeeded when they do that, but we never talk about the 90% plus of people who actually fail and can find themselves in an actually very bad situation. So, tiny experiments, this is really the answer. It's making sure that however linear you have to be in certain areas of your life, you always make sure to have a little bit of space for experimentation. You always have your mini laboratory in life where there is at least one aspect of your life you're experimenting with. And that could be literally anything. That could be your creativity. That could be your productivity. That could be your health. That could be your relationships. And choosing an area where you ask yourself, what could be different here? Is there a different approach I could try? And then paying attention to the signals and seeing what works, what doesn't, and what you might want to try next, and really iterating just like a scientist.
And how do we, because you discuss this in tiny experiments, how do we really, find the signal from you mentioned, you know, a scientist approach through these experiments. And I remember you showing a chart, and data is everything. And at the same time, I was trying to play like kind of devil's advocate in my mind, like, yes, I love data in a sense, but at the same time, I don't want to be trapped by it. So how can I not make it another hustle, in life, these tiny experiments? And so how do you find that perfect middle in, writing? You can discuss I don't want to spoil it, but how do you really approach these tiny experiments in the sense of, this is like a pure playground type of scene rather than just another sense of trying to become the best at something.
Yeah, so in the traditional SMART goals, the M stands for measurable, which is the data that you just talked about, where you have all of these metrics, a lot of them quite artificial. When you design an experiment, the tool I recommend using in the book is called a PACT, not SMART, but PACT, which stands for purposeful, actionable, continuous, and trackable. And so I don't say measurable, I say trackable here. With something you track, you're not measuring any kind of metrics. You're just tracking whether you did it or not, yes or no. And so a tiny experiment designed around a pact is when you say, I will perform a certain action for a certain duration. And so you just do the thing, you test the thing for a certain number of trials. So you could say, I will write a weekly newsletter for 6 weeks. I will meal prep every Sunday for 2 months. I will reach out to a new interesting person on LinkedIn every Monday for 6 weeks. So this is a pact. And you just track every day whether you did it or not, or every week or every month, depending on the kind of repetition that you have, the kind of schedule that you have.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for allowing me to interrupt this episode. I have a huge announcement that I'll be sharing with you just now. My first book ever is out now, called The Time Is Now, a guide to honor your time on Earth. This was a 2-year project that's been in the works. It's a tough love guide to honor your time on Earth. This book will show you how to reclaim your time and energy for what truly matters. Click the link in the show notes and you're gonna see also the link to the domain here, timeisnowbook.com. Order a copy for your loved ones, and I'm so excited for you to dive into it. Thank you.
Then in terms of analyzing the data, this is really not about having complicated spreadsheets with a bunch of numbers in there, which again might be quite artificial. It's really about analyzing what worked, what didn't, and what you might want to change next. So I share in the book a very simple tool that I call plus minus next. And it has just 3 columns. Plus, the first column is where you write everything that went well, that was quite positive. The second column, minus, is anything that didn't go so well, that was maybe a little bit uncomfortable, or where maybe you felt like you didn't have the right skills or supports or tools to be able to do it properly. And then in the last column, next, where I use a little arrow, you write what you might want to tweak, what you might want to change in the next iteration of the experiment. What is so powerful about this is that first, you are actually looking at the good and the bad, in the sense that what you're looking also at things that didn't work so well, but you're not just dwelling on this. You're also using that to learn and to grow and to build momentum, because there is the third column, the next column, that is always about, okay, I learned the plus and the minus. What am I going to focus on next? And so that's what I mean by tracking and not just measuring. You're tracking whether you did it or not. And then you're capturing those positive and negative signals. And then you're iterating to try to get it a little bit better every time you iterate. And even though you don't know where you're going, like you are with a linear goal, you can trust that success is going to emerge from that growth loop that you're building through this iterative reflection.
So essentially, this is leading us to removing ourselves from the linearity and then just syncing ourselves with what feels right. And then, can you discuss a bit more into this idea? Because it's sort of like when I think about it and I write my own pact, I think about, but what's the outcome? What's the outcome of this? And so, like, again, like the mind's trying to make this certainty protocol come into play. And so how do we navigate that uncertainty of, it feels right, let's see where it leads, and allowing that space in the in-between that you discuss to just flourish and not really be tied up into, will this be a success or not? And how do we really define, in this sense, what success would mean? Because again, you discuss a lot. I'm putting so many ideas there, Anne-Laure, but it's your fault. It's your book that stemmed these ideas. We're leading from, I don't want to iterate to perfect based on the outer. And I want to be closer to, my own definition of like, this is imperfect. My book has some typos on it and I just left them on purpose, that sort of thing. So sorry for that rant, but I'm very curious to hear your thoughts.
This is a great question. And this is what's amazing about experiments. If you think about the why and the how a scientist designs and conducts an experiment. So first, you only conduct an experiment when you're not quite sure this is going to work. If you already know this is going to work, there's no point in conducting the experiment. You already know the answer. So every time you conduct an experiment, you start from a place of knowing that, I actually don't know if this is going to work. This is why I'm conducting the experiment. Second, when you run an experiment, and just like a scientist, you withhold judgment until you're done collecting the data. So a scientist doesn't start poking at the data in the middle of the experiment and deciding like they don't like what they're seeing. And so they're just going to stop collecting the data. They just decide in advance the number of trials, whether that's conducting the experiment with 200 participants or every 6 months, but that's part of the protocol. And they say in advance, this is the number of trials. We're going to collect all of that data. We're going to go through all of the trials. And only when we're done, we're going to look at the data, make the analysis, and decide what we do with those results, whether that's conducting another experiment or just publishing a paper, whatever it is. Same with personal experimentation. You design your protocol, which is your pact, which is really a mini protocol for experimentation, and you commit to conducting this experiment and you withhold judgment. So instead of focusing on the outcome, you're just focusing on the output of showing up and of doing the thing. And you just track whether you did it or not. The objective here is not to get to a specific destination like it would be for a linear goal. The objective here is just to learn something new. So when you're done collecting the data, you completed your pact, you did the thing, you can look back and you can see what you learned. Did you enjoy this? Did it work? Did it, depending on what the hypothesis was, did it increase your productivity? Did it increase your creativity? Did it help you build your network? Did it give you more energy? Did you feel better when you did that thing versus when you didn't do it before? And this is really what you're looking at. The other amazing thing about conducting those kind of personal experiments is that because you're tracking whether you did it or not, if you look back and you see that there were a lot of days where you didn't do the thing, that's actually data. The fact that that experiment was really hard to stick to, that there were many days where you didn't do it, that's also interesting data. You can look back and ask yourself, why didn't I do it? And be honest with yourself. So let's say, for example, that you said, I'm going to do a tiny experiment of going for a daily walk for 15 days. And you look back and there are several days where you didn't do it. Was it because maybe your cousin was visiting that day and you stayed home and you watched a movie together? Ah, interesting. I actually kind of wanted to go on that walk, but I didn't that day because this thing happened. Cool, that's fine. But if there are several days you didn't go and there was no reason, you didn't want to go on the walk. Interesting. Maybe this is not the right modality for me to move my body or to go outside. Maybe I need to find something else. Maybe I should try yoga, dancing, something different that would be more exciting to me. I didn't fail. I learned something new about myself, and I'm going to use that data to design my next experiment.
Wow, yeah. It makes me think about one person in particular that you mentioned on your book, Anne-Laure, is Ron Finley. It made me think a lot about him right now, what you were saying, because it seemed as though the scripts, that the linear scripts that we have built or that have built themselves through, our own repetition, muscle memory, you could say, drive us to finding that one singular goal, and that for me began to transmit, like you articulated on tiny experiments, began to transfer into a one core identity. Who is Alex? Alex is the one who needs to work on a prestigious job, have the acclaimed, appraisal of everyone, etc., and retire. And then, Alex is this person, and you mentioned, I'm probably gonna butcher it because I think about it in the sunk cost fallacy, cognitive script theory. You wrote on the cognitive script theory, which is, I would love for you to expand on it. I want to spoil it because this is your show, but it makes me think on, if Alex has been always this way, therefore needs to be, the same way. But with Ron Finley and with what you were saying now, it allows us to embrace complex identities, our whole humanity, how can we really become ourselves? And so I would love for you to expand on these ideas, on the cognitive script theory, Ron Finley, what drew you to him specifically, and how all of this entails to really finding more of our humanity.
Yeah. So cognitive script theory, this is research that was started in the late 70s, and there was a seminal study in 1979 where the design was very simple. They basically asked people, given this particular situation, how would you behave? How would you act? And what they realized is that for most people, if you put them in a certain situation, they're going to act in exactly the same way. So if you tell people you go to the restaurant, you go to the dentist, you go to the doctor, how do you act in that situation? Most people will act exactly in the same way without really thinking about it. And just to give you an example, so let's say you go to the dentist and you go to the waiting room, you wait there. That's why it's called a waiting room. And then the doctor will call your name.
And I'm excited to also announce that I'm going to open through conversations to a members exclusive section only, where you'll be able to access episodes earlier. I'm going to create so many perks for you that I'm excited for. I wanted to get the best value possible, and I've been thinking on how to do it. I want to give you access to early videos. I want to give you also access to when I record an interview, that you have access real time to just watch while we record, and also to have a live stream, meaning that you can tune in and ask your own questions, your Q&A to some of your favorite guests, and also some of the guests that you don't really know yet, but you would love to hear. And also that way you have some sort of skin in the game, as you're supporting the podcast in some way and you're more invested in the success of it. And so I'm excited for this.
And then you go in their office and they tell you to open your mouth and look at your teeth, right? If you were sitting in the waiting room and the dentist came out and asked you to open your mouth in front of everybody else, you would feel pretty weird, right? And that's because they're going off script. That's not the script you're expecting. And it's the same for lots of areas in our lives. That's not an issue when we're following those scripts to go to the restaurant or things like that, where you don't really want to overthink every little decision that you're making, and where it's actually useful for everybody as a society that we're all very nicely following the same script. And that's not really an issue. The problem is that we're actually following these scripts in lots of other areas in our lives. And some of them might seem trivial, about the way we dress or the kind of books that we read or those kind of things, but also the kind of careers that we decide to pursue, the decisions that we make in our relationships, the places where we live, and any kind of big decisions like this. A lot of them can be influenced by our cognitive scripts. And in the book, I share, there are many, many scripts, but in the book, I share 3 big ones that I have found to be the most common ones in the people I work with. The first one, which you briefly touched upon, is the sequel script. It's the idea that whatever decision you make today, it needs to make sense based on the decisions that you made in the past. So it needs to have this nice narrative that tells a story that makes sense. The second big cognitive script is the crowd pleaser script. And this is the script where we make decisions based on what we think is going to make other people around us happy, and especially our loved ones. That could be our parents, our spouse, our friends. And so choosing a job based on the reaction we think other people around us are going to have. We want them to say things like, such a cool job, this is amazing, so proud of you. And this is how we make our decisions. And the last big cognitive script, which I think is really the most insidious one, because as a society, we have decided to glorify it, is the one I call the epic script. It's kind of similar to a Hollywood movie. We feel like whatever we decide to pursue or to explore, it has to be big, it has to be impressive, it has to be super ambitious. And anything less than that is not meaningful enough. And because of that, we ignore opportunities that could grow into something meaningful, but that don't look like they're going to be big when we just get started. So we actually close ourselves to many opportunities. And the reason why I wanted to interview Ron Finley in my book, and I was really fascinated with his story, is that he's an amazing example of someone who has managed to break free from these cognitive scripts. He started his career in fashion, And then he realized that it was forbidden for people to grow vegetables on the street in his neighborhood. And so he became what he calls a guerrilla gardener. And that turned into an entire new career for him, which he completely created. That didn't exist. There's no career ladder called guerrilla gardener. He created that for himself. And as he says, and he told me in his interview, he also doesn't consider that this is his only identity in life. He's still a fashion designer. He's a guerrilla gardener. He's a dad. He's a full human being. And this is really the mindset that I want to encourage people to have. This is really what an experimental mindset is about. It's about embracing the complexity of what being a human being is and knowing that you can change, that it's messy, and that you don't have to follow a script.
Wow, yeah, and it reminds me how you wrote on the book how he said, I breathe, I'm a breather, and that in itself like encapsulates so much that of what you said, which is, you know, living a bit through also grace, because it feels as though when you mention the epic script, it really gets a hold of us because it captures no one wants to feel. Maybe I'm speaking on behalf of 8 billion people here, but no one wants to feel that they don't wanna they're not living their best life or their life that their loved ones want to, like you say, want them to live. So the epic script allows us to think like we're a Hollywood movie, and if it doesn't go that way, it means we failed. Uh, but living through grace, understanding that being human is messy. Like, I don't know about you. I don't know what we're doing here on this tiny blue dot. I just know we're playing this game of life, and what you're opening the doors to. And Laure is with tiny experiments is saying, this is a bit more philosophical, but you're saying, you're alive. Make life your playground, and that in itself will allow you to share your colors with others. Paradoxically, that way you will really share. Your loved ones will love you more because those are your true colors, right? And so I really love that idea, and it makes me think of our relationship with time, with the two distinctions that you say in the book, which I would love for you to expand on. But one is really tied up with that notion of script, right? Like there has to be a time uh, that we need to course through our existence for everything to click, and then all of a sudden you wake up 40 years later, and did I enjoy a single moment of that? So would you like to expand a bit more on that?
Yes, I discovered in the process of writing this book that the ancient Greeks had not one word but two words for time. They had the first word, which is the one we use in our societies, which was chronos. So that's the word we use in chronometer, for example, and a lot of words related to time. Chronos is the quantitative definition of time. It's the time of seconds and minutes and hours, and it is really linked to this image of time where every moment is a tiny little box that you have to fill with as much stuff as possible in order to live a full, meaningful life. This is really linked also to toxic productivity because you feel like if you haven't done enough with each of these boxes, then you've wasted your time. And again, it's linked to this language that we have around time of spending, wasting your time, right? Which is very, very quantitative. So that's the chronos definition of time. But they also had a second word, Kairos, which also means time, but which is a qualitative definition of time. And this is the time that has more to do with the depth of each moment. And to me, the best example to talk about Kairos time, and everybody has experienced this. You know, when you're having an amazing conversation with a friend and you look at your phone or your watch and you're like, oh, where has the time gone? What happened?
Mhm.
You really lost track of time. This is Kairos time. And Kairos time is the idea that each moment has a different quality to it, and that you can decide moment to moment what kind of experience you want to have. That also means that there are moments where it is more important to you to spend time with a loved one. There are moments where you actually want to lose yourself in deep work and creative thinking and actually be on your own and being hyper focused. There are moments where you want to do nothing, and this is really the qualitative definition of time. It's the knowledge, the inner knowing that we all have, that time is not a series of equally sized boxes. Time is elastic. It can contract and it can expand, and it really has to do with our intentional relationship with it.
And it's like a torture, no? When you're like having that deep conversation or that really meaningful time with someone, and the time flows by, like it's as if someone up there or the universe or whatever just created that torture for us, because we would love for those moments to last forever, right? But they all of a sudden they start disappearing,
Yeah, that's
and
what makes them
this
so
one.
precious too, this realization that each of these moments are unique. And this is Kairos time also. Each moment is precious, but not in the toxic productivity lens of Chronos time, and that qualitative lens of having those deep, beautiful moments where you feel most alive.
Yes, and you mentioned toxic productivity, and that ties up with the word ambition, right? You have to be super ambitious, and then if you're not ambitious, you're anti-ambitious, and then start this debate of, are you doing the thing that makes you the most productive, or you know, are you really are you grinding all day? Are you obsessed? And so, what do you think about this whole concept of ambition? Is it a bad thing? Is it a good thing? How do we integrate it with, you know, tiny experiments, with finding out, what really attracts us and interests us in the sense of, our own compass? Because you can be ambitious, right? It shouldn't be a bad thing, but at the same time, it does feel like many people get, like possessed by this meme sort of thing.
Yeah, I think ambition in and of itself is not bad, but on its own, it can actually become an obsession. And so I I have a little visual in the book that describes ambition and curiosity on this 4x4 matrix, which I think is very helpful to think about different mindsets that we might have in life. So if you let go of both your ambition and your curiosity, then this is the cynic mindset where you don't really care about success anymore. You don't care about growth. You don't care about being ambitious. And you also have zero curiosity in terms of wanting to explore and try new things. If you do have a bit of curiosity, but you don't have ambition, that's the escapist mindset. So you might want to watch new movies and travel and shopping and any kind of things that feel like they're new and you're exploring something new, but you don't want to work too hard. You don't want to push yourself. You don't have this aspect of ambition. If you only have ambition, but no curiosity, you see curiosity as a distraction, then that's the perfectionist mindset. You're just trying to do everything right. You're in a Chronos type of approach to time where you just want to do as much as possible, use the time in the most effective way possible. And so exploring questions and being curious and experimenting almost feels like a waste of time to you. But I think that ambition and curiosity are actually compatible. And that's the experimental mindset. When you have a lot of ambition, but also you're highly curious. When you have those two perspectives in life, when you're both highly ambitious and highly curious, I think this is when you can live the most fulfilling kind of lives, being the most alive, where you're trying new things and you're also pushing yourself, where you do have this sense of growth and also this sense of exploration.
I'm thinking of the word curiosity that you mentioned, and log, and is really, I think of someone who, let's say, really followed a linear script, right? And all of a sudden they lost track of what really curiosity means for them. What is curiosity, and how are they able to really go back to it, like to really take out the dust of that more of that inner compass of what interests me, what's curiosity.
Yeah, curiosity, when you go back to its most basic definition, is the desire to know. It's the desire to know, and that's it. When we lose our curiosity, it is replaced with either the desire to be successful, when there's just ambition and there's no desire to know. You just want to be successful. And so you actually want to focus on what you know already. You don't want to take the risk of trying something new and it might not work out. Or it can also be replaced with the desire to be safe, and so you don't want also to take that risk and try something new. So you stick again to what you know, not necessarily out of ambition, but more like out of fear and anxiety. And curiosity is really an antidote to the hustle of toxic productivity and also to the fear of uncertainty, because you allow yourself to ask questions and you allow yourself to make mistakes. You allow yourself to fail, just like a kid, a child who actually doesn't really care about being successful from a societal standpoint yet, right? They just want to try new things. They poke at things, they push buttons, they just try to see what happens when they try something new.
And Laura, as we begin to wrap up this first interview, I hope we have another chance to discuss again lots of themes to unpack. What do you think about the challenges and opportunities ahead, in the outer world? Because at the end of the day, like you began your our discussion here, conversation, there is uncertainty, perhaps more than ever, especially in the workplace with the AI tech revolution. All of a sudden, we're always reading like it's gonna take your job, you're gonna be out of a job. But hey, if I'm gonna be out of a job, my whole identity will crumble. What am I gonna do with my free time? If I don't know how to do tiny experiments, I haven't read Log's book, what am I gonna do? So, how do you feel about the challenges slash opportunities ahead, and how does that lead us to really finding our interest and really tapping and leveraging your ideas from the book?
Well, I mean, this is why I think tiny experiments are so powerful, is that the book is not about giving people a prescriptive step-by-step recipe to be successful, because I actually don't even know what being successful will look like in the next decade or in the next, few years. Things are changing so fast. And so I actually don't know where we're going, what the world is going to look like. And that's really what is amazing about tiny experiments, is that the idea is to figure it out as you go and to create your own definition of success. So that's the only recommendation I would give to people, is that anytime you feel uncertain, every time you experience doubts, anytime you're facing a challenge, you can actually see this as an opportunity to design a new experiment. And so, just like a scientist who sees something they don't understand, and instead of just freezing in panic, they're actually curious. They're like, oh, interesting. I haven't seen this one before. Maybe I can design an experiment around that. And that's really what an experimental mindset is all about.
And Laura, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for writing your book, for sharing your story. It was an honor to host you. Hope to host you again soon. And yeah, I will send everyone your way to read Tiny Experiments and to follow your work. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.